believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes, also known as Ricky Varandas, and another great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest, researcher, historian, author, and many other labels I could use to describe this guy, but all around just one of my favorite people to sit down and chat with, my dear friend, Alex Krainer. And we talk about a lot of different topics today, geopolitics, spirituality, and many other things. And I felt a little bit rusty because this is the first podcast back. I had a little bit of a hiatus due to a bunch of things that are going on in my life, and then the summer and just being busy and all this stuff, but I'm getting back into rhythm. This is one of 3 episodes that are already recorded. Now it's just a matter of finding time to record these intros, do some sound editing, any other things I can do to make the audio sound better, and anything I can do for the videos to look better before uploading. But I got a amazing conversation with Dr. Jessica Rose, and also a amazing conversation with Dr. Peter McCullough, who are 2 of my favorite guests and 2 returning guests. So definitely look out for those podcasts once this one is uploaded. Now it's time to remind you guys why I don't consistently put out episodes of the Ripple Effect Podcast, and that's because it's not my full-time gig. But if you want to help me reach that goal, please consider donating or supporting the Ripple Effect Podcast. Like I always tell you guys, this is a value for value show. And if you can't give value financially, don't worry about it. There's plenty of other ways to give value back. And one of the ways is rating and reviewing the show. Help out with the algorithms by rating the show, reviewing the show on all the video platforms I'm on all the audio platforms I'm on, sharing it on your social media platforms, and also sharing it with your friends and family. If there's a specific episode that you really enjoy, please share that with someone who might also enjoy the podcast. All these little things go a long way. And I know money's tight. I know the majority of people who listen to podcasts, and specifically mine, can't or won't financially support the show. But like I said, there's plenty of ways to support the show just by taking a little bit of time out of your day to rate, review, and share the show. Now, if you are in a good financial situation and you can afford to give a little bit, please consider doing so. We have a Patreon page, and you can donate as little as $1 a month. And if a small percentage of people listen to the show donated as little as $1 a month, I could do the show full time. So no contribution is too little. If you donate on Patreon as little as $1 a month, you also get to participate in our Patreon podcasts. And those are podcasts I do exclusively with my Patreon supporters. Then I release it as an episode. So if you want to be on the next one, please consider joining our Patreon page. And as always, you can find these links on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, or in the show description. I also have a merch store, but for some reason I'm having issues with it at the moment. I think because I've had so many controversial people on, tons of whistleblowers, people that have been censored and banned on many platforms. And of course, as you know, I've been censored and suppressed on many platforms. Every once in a while, I run into some issues. I run into some issues with Google Podcasts not showing my episodes. I run into Spotify shadow banning my shows, so you don't know when a new episode comes out. I've had issues with YouTube permanently banning me and Google shadow banning me, so it makes it very hard for people to search for the Ripple Effect Podcast. And of course, I've had some issues with iTunes and many other platforms. So I don't know what's going on with my merch store at the moment, but I'm going to try to figure it out and try to get it up and going. So hopefully by the time you listen to this episode or soon after, the merch store will be up and running and you can actually purchase stuff. So please check out the merch store if it's up and running. If it's not, please check out the merch store in the near future when hopefully everything's fixed. But other ways of also supporting the show is sending a one-time donation via PayPal, Venmo. You could send crypto. And I also have some great sponsors. Of course, all the sponsors are friends of mine, people that have been on the show prior to becoming sponsors, and all services and people that I really like and enjoy. The most important one possibly is Content Safe. Matt from Content Safe is a regular on the show and also a regular on my other show, The Union of the Unwanted, which I host with Sam Tripoli, Midnight Mike, and Charlie Robinson. And Matt from Content Safe is basically my IT guy. He runs my website. He syncs all my video channels together. So that way, when I upload to one location, soon after the video, the thumbnail, the description, everything's available on all the video platforms I'm on. And he's also a great guy who really enjoys and appreciates alternative media. So if you're a streamer, YouTuber, podcaster, and you're looking for IT services, if you're looking to sync all your video channels together to save you tons of uploading time, please hit up Matt from Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener to Ripple Effect Podcast, and he'll definitely hook you up. The next sponsor is Richard Groves, the University of Reason. If you're at a crossroads in life, which I'm sure many of you are, you're doing a job that's unfulfilling, and you want to just try something new, connect with a new community, learn some new skills, expand on some skills maybe you already have, check out the University of Reason and the very popular autonomy courses. Hit up Richard Grove, use the links in the show description. You can help yourself and the Ripple Effect Podcast at the same time. And then last but not least is Element Electrolytes. I drink these things every day. It was created by a OG in the health community, and Rob Wolf, who has been on the show. He's been on every major show you could think of, especially all the major health and nutrition shows. He's also been on Joe Rogan's a bunch. He is one of the people I respect the most in regards to health and nutrition. He created an amazing product that helps with cramping, headaches, migraines, fatigue, and many other things that are due to dehydration. And he created something that helps with these dehydration symptoms. It helps optimize your brain and body. If you're an athlete, if you're super conscious with what you put in your body, this thing only has premium ingredients. It's sweetened with stevia. I know there's a lot of no sugar products out there. The majority of them are sweetened with sucralose, which is a artificial sweetener. An Element is sweetened with the stevia leaf, so it's a natural sweetener. And it has enough of the ingredients you need to optimize your performance. And Bradley Beal is in a Element commercial, and he is a very good NBA basketball player. And he talks about when he was a kid, his mother used to have him take a little bit of salt before he played basketball. And he was consistently just about the only kid that never cramped or had muscle fatigue issues. And that's the power of sodium, which is an essential mineral. That's the thing about a lot of these things like cholesterol and healthy fats and sodium. Cholesterol is a hormone. Healthy fats is essential for brain function. And sodium is essential electrolyte to make sure you can bypass muscle fatigue and cramping. They also make chocolate and mocha and other flavors that go really well with a hot coffee. If you're one of those people who drink hot coffee all year round, please check out Element Electrolytes. Stay hydrated and have the peace of mind that when you're drinking something with flavor, it's actually healthy and good for you. And everything you eat and drink is either going to help you or hurt you. So pay attention and don't be afraid of spending a little extra money on the best supplements, best electrolytes, best things that you put in your body. That's just great advice for everybody. I know when money gets tight, we try to find places to cut corners, and food and stuff you put in your body on a regular basis should never be the place you do that. So please check out Element Electrolytes. Use the link on my website or in the show description. And when you do use that link, you get a free gift with every purchase, every single time you use that link. So please use the link when you do purchase this stuff. And thank you everybody who has checked out these sponsors. I really, really appreciate it. And before I forget, I am going to be in Connecticut coming up Saturday, the 12th of August. Hopefully I get this episode out before that, because my dear friend Sam Tripoli is going to be there. And anytime he's in the East Coast, you can almost guarantee I'm going to be there. So definitely come hang out with me, hang out with Sam, come represent the Swarm, represent the Ripple Effect Podcast, and represent the Union of the Unwanted. Thanks, guys. Enjoy this amazing podcast with Alex Krainer, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Mr. Varandas.
¿Cómo estás, Alex?
Hola,
How are you?
estoy bien. And you?
Good, good.
What's new?
Well, this is the first podcast I've done in a little bit, just because life's been a little crazy. I coached a soccer camp, helped this guy, John Amaral, who's kind of like
Uh-huh.
a local football legend. He played professional overseas and worked for like ESPN Deportes and ESPN International as an analyst, and he's coached everywhere. So he puts together a 2-week camp at typically it's at like a local college or prep school, and it's an overnight camp. And this year I have a bunch of friends that coach there, and John's awesome. So, and my son wanted to participate, but he's a little bit on the younger side. So I'm like,
Okay.
well, if I coach, then maybe we can get a dorm together, and it'll be a little easier, because he's only 8, so you don't want an 8-year-old living by themselves and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, but did that took up, so I kind of kept my schedule open. I'm like, I don't know how burnt out I'm going to be for that week or a week after or whatnot. So I kind of, now I'm kind of getting back in the rhythm of it. And then it's summer. So, and I live in New England, and summer's short and it flies by. So you try to pack your schedule, like I always say, like, I'd rather be busy than bored, and so
Yeah,
I just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
trying to find something to do and keep everybody, just constantly having things to do, getting together with friends, playing sports, doing stuff. We just went to go see Manchester. Actually, it was the Saturday after that camp finished. We went to go see Manchester United and Arsenal. They were in America, and they played they said it's New York, but it's really New Jersey. It's at the New York Jets and New York Giants Stadium. And it was actually 82,000 people came out for the friendly, which apparently was the most they ever had for a football game, for a soccer game, in that
Wow.
stadium. So it was pretty impressive. It's funny how like the sports really growing at a incredible rate in America, and I love it because it is one of those sports where it like no matter what part of the world you're from, and I don't know
Yeah,
how the hell do we end up. I always end up starting a conversation with soccer talk. But it's one of those sports where like regardless where you are in the world, like the one topic you can kind of talk about is like soccer and like typically music. Music's become much more international now, where a lot of people listen to similar artists. But soccer is also one of those topics that it doesn't matter if you're from the Middle East, if you're from Asia, Africa, if you're wherever you're from, we can all talk about the Premier League. We can all talk about Messi, Ronaldo, we can debate those things.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I always tell my kids, learn how to play soccer. If you're good, you're gonna be welcome, and you're gonna have friends anywhere in the world. And well, the kids know everything, so they don't listen.
Yeah, but the other thing too, like I have parents that I talk to, and they're like, "Well, my kid's not going to be a star," and it's just like it's almost like if they're not going to get a scholarship, then what's the point of doing it or taking it seriously? And the thing is, like to me, there's so many life lessons you can learn from it. Like it's like that saying, tough men make good times make soft men make bad times. Like we're in that era where like if you're obviously my life was physically and probably mentally much easier than my parents, who were raised on a farm and came to a country, didn't speak English, didn't write English, didn't have any education here. And, so they worked their asses off. And then my life is a little less difficult because of it. And then my kid's life, you try to make it a little better than my life. Right. And so it continues in that direction. So it's like, how do I give my kids a easier life, right? Because that's kind of what you want to do. You want to help your kids. You don't want to see your kids suffer. You don't want to see them struggle. But how do I help them learn the lessons that you get from suffering and struggling and dealing with anxiety and dealing with being in pressure situations without actually putting them in pressure situations? And sports is a perfect place, where a safe environment, a perfect place to do so, where you can put them in sports where they're forced to have to play through fatigue. They're forced to have to learn how to maybe get along with teammates they don't get along with, or maybe themselves learn to be a good teammate, right? Learn that they have some social or characteristic issues that need to be resolved to really help get to the goal of winning and being the best team they can be. So like, it's, to me, like there's so much benefit in it in regards to just more than just learning the skills and learning the trait and the tactics and everything that is specifically about the sport. Like there's all these other life things that happen. And I think I it was Pat Bet, I always mess up his name, Patrick Bet David, who was talking about how, I'm almost positive it was either him or somebody on his podcast was talking about how a lot of people who are great business people were usually like ex-athletes, like, and probably some of that has to do with like maybe being competitive, like, if you're a good athlete, typically you don't like losing, you like being competitive. And I can see how that can be a bad, trait too, if it goes too far, if you're too competitive and you're just burning bridges and screwing everybody. But I think, there's other traits that come along with being into sports or being into exercise or CrossFit or being a gym rat, like discipline and hard work and appreciating those things. So yeah, there's a lot of positives that come out of it. And I'm sure, much like yourself, I at one point looked at sports like it was completely pointless, because I'm like, it's just mindless entertainment. And why am I consuming myself with this stuff when there's all these other bigger issues in the world and there's better things and that I could be spending time researching and learning about. But then after a while, you get so consumed with that stuff that you start sounding like Alex Jones, because when you're like, I always say, I'm like, Alex Jones, like if you were doing a radio show 5 days a week and you're talking about child trafficking, cults, the New World Order, you're talking about secret societies, you're talking about shadow governments, you're probably gonna once in a while lose your mind on the air. You know what I mean? You're gonna, like, when you're that. So it's like, my point is, the nice thing about sports or anything, if whatever your hobby might be, painting, drawing, woodwork, whatever it might be, like, you need to unplug at some point. So I mean, I am supposed to be interviewing you, so if you want to now share what you've been up to, and if you want to expand on any of that, please do.
Before I get to that, I just wanted to add something about sports, which is particularly important with team sports, is that I think that you learn to not give up, because you probably go through many, many experiences where, by plugging away, you can reverse a lost cause. Like you can be losing a game and still win in the end, So I think that's a good thing to learn. And I think that sports is a great way to learn it, because, and maybe in other venues in life, it's a lot more costly. But then also that experience of winning and losing, the comradeship you develop with other kids through, traveling to games and tournaments and winning and losing together and fighting and all these things. I think that's stuff that nobody can give you back. Nobody can teach you all of that, because it's very subtle. It's in the moment. It's happening in real time. And I think it builds character. As you said, it teaches kids how to deal with adversity, how to cope with the teammates they don't like or they disagree with, and all of those things. So it goes completely outside of the way they teach us in school. Like everybody's already starting to get used to sitting in their desk, which will become their cubicle, doing as they're told, not stepping out of line, fearing sticking out, whereas in sports you want to stick out, right? You want to be the best that you can be. And so yeah, I think that's extremely valuable. And I think that for young kids, there's no richer experience that you can offer them. So I think that's great. What have I been up to? Ricky, life has been ridiculously busy and hectic. I don't even know where to begin. It's been like this for about a year and a half now, but especially this summer because I don't know. I started my June by going first to England to a conference, and then I went to Canada to another event, and then just like the school holiday started. You have to figure out what to do with the kids, and work has been getting busier. And so I don't even know. And then the world events have been getting equally ridiculous or even more so. And just keeping track of what's going on has become really hard. I have my reading pile is goes to halfway to the moon, and everything's relevant. Everything is important. Events in Ukraine, events in Africa, events in China, the BRICS, the still continuing COVID story, implosion of the empire, inflation, recession, protests in France. It's just not stopping. It seems like decades are passing in the space of a few weeks. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you what I've been up to. I've been trying to figure out how to not sleep.
Can you?
Sorry, not to mention the global boiling and the unbreathable air, which is to be blamed on humans, apparently.
Yeah, well, that's all stuff I kind of want to hit on today. I want to it does get really difficult to keep up with everything. And like even when I was doing the coaching the soccer camp, I had like no idea what was going on with the outside world. Like I was just because you're up at 8 or you have to get the kids out of the dorm at 8, breakfast at 8:15, then you go out, you do your first session, then you do lunch, and then you have like a 1 hour break. And then you go back out to your second session, then you have dinner together. Like you basically live like a footballer, and you get your uniforms. You have laundry, you have a cafeteria where your food's done. So you literally live like a professional footballer. And I was thinking to myself while I was there, I'm like, if I was in one of these jobs that consumed every second of every day, like this job, like like
Yeah.
we were coaching, but you kind of felt like a professional coach. It's like, okay, you're constantly talking about at lunch or breakfast, you and the other coaches are talking about what you're going to do with the next session and the training you're going to do and all this stuff. I'm like, I would not know what's going on at all in the world. Like I just it would be very difficult,
Right. Yeah.
to really and so and then when a thing like COVID happens and I see people say, hey, you want your life back, get vaccinated, I'd be like, you know what, how about everybody just get vaccinated so we can go back to life? We can get back to where we were. We can go back to doing the things we were doing. And it's because I've neglected this part of the universe, as part of how society has been engineered. And, I've neglected learning and researching and thinking about, the structure of society itself, that I could easily be tricked into, basically just following the herd and going along with it. And I think many people, that's what happened. I also think that, and we've talked about this, in many conversations, I'm sure we've mentioned it, that it also forced a lot of people who were stuck in that everyday grind and stuck in that rhythm. It knocked them out of rhythm. It knocked them out of their regular tempo, and it kind of gave them time to research and think. And Patrick Bet David was just on the Rogan podcast. I actually had a phenomenal conversation, and he was talking about how during COVID, how he's like, I'm sure many of us, because we had no choice and we want to know what was going on in the world, spend nights of researching till 1 a.m, 2 a.m. The wife's asleep, the kids are asleep, you should be asleep, and you're just up because you're obsessed with like trying to figure out what is really going on. And I think it really did snap a lot of people out of that trance that many of them were living in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And for me, I I had this great privilege of working in an industry where you're part of well, it's not part of your job description, but it's in actuality, it is your job to constantly do research and figure out what's going on and how the world works. But you're right that so many people have jobs that absorb all of their energy practically on a daily basis. And then when they have any free time at all, they wanna unplug and relax. And obviously that makes it much more difficult to be tuned into what is going on beyond the narrative that's being shoved down your throat 24/7. And then you kind of figure like, well, they wouldn't be lying to us, not quite so much and not quite about such big things. And so I think, yeah, you're right. That's probably how a lot of people got snookered. But that's why we who have been able to research and look into stuff and reach different conclusions have to keep speaking up and speaking out.
Well, you were talking about how, going to, and I've talked about this with my kids, and I've talked with other people about how, like, there's a bond that you and other people that you go to battle with, there's a bond that you create that's like, you can't really explain it, but there's something about having each other's back and going to battle together that will bring people together. I mean, you see it in the military, you see it with firefighters, with police officers, people who play sports together. You're in a big game, you go to battle together, you're sweating, you're bleeding, you left it all out on the field together, and there's a respect that you have for one another because of it. And I think COVID is very similar, because there's a lot of respect I have for the voices that went to battle with, the Ripple Effect podcast, and the people like yourself and all the other people who are willing to speak out, not now when it's easy, but was willing to speak out when it was difficult. It was willing to speak out when they knew that it was going to lead to pushback, hatred, and dislike from friends, family, and really, it was really simple, because to paint you as a crazy person, because media and everybody else was censoring any actual information that would go against the mainstream narrative. And everybody was kind of just on board with saying, like, yeah, no, there's no grand conspiracy, there's nothing going on here. And so, like, to me, like, a lot of these people who, the James Corbett's, the Jason Burmis, the, even Mel K, who, has done, I know you were just on our show recently too, done great work. And, Ryan from Last American Vagabond, and all these people who were pushing back, being censored, and still, not being afraid to speak out when it was most difficult. Like, I to me, like, till this day, I still have like this just incredible amount of respect for those people. And even though there's a lot of other people who didn't speak out immediately, who I still like, but I don't have the same amount of respect for them as I do, because I'm like, okay, when shit hits the fan, like, you're not gonna, when you're being pushed, you're not gonna push back. You're gonna wait till it's safe. You're gonna wait till everybody else has done it, right? It's it's a difference between somebody getting hit by a car, and then the first person who runs there and tries to help them, then everybody else comes. Or if nobody, goes there, then everybody kind of just waits to see who's going to be the first person to go there, or if there's a fight, right? Like, nobody, breaks it up until that first person tries to break it up. And it's like, okay, he's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go do the right, it's kind of a similar situation.
Yeah, but that's okay. I have to make peace with that, because we're not, like, we're not all in the same situation in life. We don't all face same circumstances. I think it's very important for us to have a lot of patience with other people, and to kind of keep the door open, not to dismiss them, not to condemn them, other than those who actively worked against us. So people reach that moment of awakening at different moments in time in their life, and we know that the establishment has been extremely heavy-handed in I'm sorry, in discouraging people from speaking out. All you have to do is put into a search engine, like somebody fired for just saying that there are two genders, or that vaccines are not safe, or that global warming is not true. And you'll see loads of people who lost their jobs over these kinds of things. And then usually what they do is they'll make a show out of that, to send a message so that everybody can see it, so that they, they impress upon the masses of people, like, this is what can happen to you if you do not toe the line and comply. And so I think that people who spoke out were first people who were inclined to do so, because they understood something was wrong. Second, they were able to do so. They were.
You're right out.
I had a cup of tea, and I put some cinnamon in it, and I think that some of the powder went down the wrong tube, which happens sometimes, and then until it gets out. Anyway, where was I? So
well,
it's genuinely difficult for people to be able to do that. Most people have jobs, mortgages, wives, or husbands, whatever. And maybe they feel inclined to say something, but maybe their spouse says, like, "Oh, no, don't do that. You're just gonna get attention to us. Maybe you have a mortgage and you can't afford to lose your job, and blah, blah, blah." There's a million reasons. I think it's great that there were as many of us that there were, because I think that this never happened in the past. There used to be a time when you were not able to have this kind of a conversation in public. So you depended on meeting people in the pub or over coffee or somewhere in person. You depended on newspapers and radio and television for receiving information. Many fewer people had access to real information about what's going on in the world. So I think that the number of people that were able to speak out this time around was probably orders of magnitude larger than ever before. And so I think that's all great. And I think that the majority will catch up. Some people never will. Some people are on the wrong side. And that's okay, because, it was never 100% of the population that ever changed things. It's always actually a minority, of people who are determined and who are persistent. And as we talked in the sports, who do not get discouraged because there may be a couple of points down 5 minutes before the end of the match. So, you just keep pushing and pushing until something cracks. And I think that we were there. I remember when the whole thing started, from day zero, it was clear to me that it was a hoax. And I was absolutely horrified, because I knew that they would not be able to retreat. They kind of crossed the Rubicon. And I didn't know, what was going to happen. And then I remember when they first introduced the mask mandate, that I felt like something broke inside me. I felt very kind of scared, in the sense of, like, I stepped into some kind of a dystopia that I do not recognize. And everywhere you look, people were wearing their masks. And I even got yelled at by somebody because I came within, the 6 feet of them. I thought it was a very ugly moment, but it lasted a very brief time. We sobered up. We're living back in something that is very close to the old normal. And I think that we're actually moving beyond that into a better normal slowly. So I think all that is great. And unless you actively pushed humanity into this slavery matrix, all's forgiven.
I love that you're being optimistic, and I kind of agree with you to some extent. I do think it woke up so many people that you know,
Yes.
it's almost, and I remember when they kept using the term new normal. I'm like, I'm not saying, I'm like, new normal is not bad per se, because like the old normal, there were some issues, right? It's not like government propaganda just came out of nowhere during COVID. It's not like, we haven't been manipulated, and social engineering didn't just start, but I do feel like now it's almost like, okay, we're not just trying to get things back to the way things were. We're trying to get things even better than they were, and we're like
Yes.
open to these new fights and battles. And people are talking about BlackRock, and people are talking about what the ESG score or whatever the hell that's called, and things going too far. And so yeah, I there is a lot of good that came out of a lot of horror. And to me, it's weird, because always being in this world of like conspiracy theories and alternate, historical uh just alternate people who had alternate views on history and what was going on in the world. And you always kind of heard conversations about, like, just the worst of the worst things happening, martial law and all this stuff. And you're just like, for some reason, like deep inside, I'm like, I don't think we'll ever get to that level. Like, I know, I'm like, I always felt like the most evil of things would happen behind the curtain, right? And it would be like a slow transition, a slow step into that, into that direction. And COVID, it just, everything was ramped up so quickly. And it's like, I'm seeing everybody wear masks. I'm seeing everybody fighting over stuff at the grocery store, fighting because you're too close to each other, fighting because you coughed or sneezed near somebody. Just all this craziness. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is the world that I thought I would never see. I always thought, like, to control people, like you needed some sense of, like, you need some chaos, but it's like controlled chaos. Like you need, Black Lives Matter protests, and you need, right wing protests, and you need left wing, and you need everybody a little bit of chaos, but like, control it. But at the height of COVID, like everywhere I went, I felt like everybody was at the edge of snapping. And I'm just like, I wonder how far they can continue to push this. People are losing their businesses. People are legitimately afraid. Like some people, like, absolutely believed all the experts that were telling them that the world was going to end, and this was the most lethal virus, and a quarter of the human race was going to die or whatever. So it's like some people actually bought into all that and were like true believers and actually petrified. You had, like I said, people who their businesses were closing down and suffering. You had people that couldn't do the things that kept them sane, like going to the gym and working out, or going to church and being around a community, or going to AA and those type of things. So it's like it felt like everybody was just so, like, I felt like it wasn't gonna take much more before, like, literally things were gonna go too far. That's the way I felt. And one thing that I love the fact that out of nowhere, like all of a sudden masks were gone, nobody was afraid of it, and then COVID was talked about like it was past tense. Like out of nowhere, it was like a week later after masks were gone, and and everybody was focused on Russia, and we're talking about COVID like it's past tense. And I'm looking at people, I'm like, 2 weeks ago you were screaming at people for not wearing a mask, and now you're acting like that was like years ago, and it just happened. And all of a sudden, because the TV told you to forget about it and move on, you're forgetting about it and moving on. And that part of the whole transition made me nervous, because I'm like, these people, like, like it woke up a lot of people, but there's a lot of people who just can't be saved. Like that, whatever the TV tells them, they're still just going to be, the people who just go along with whatever they're told.
You're right. There is a segment of the population who does have that psychological profile, but I tend to think that that must be by design, because I think that we are hardwired to be cooperative and trusting. You just simply do not expect that other people in the community, especially those whom you look up to for for leadership, thought leadership, spiritual leadership, political, whatever, that they would actually deliberately lie to you with malicious intent. So you tend to trust your leaders and go along with what they suggest. And I think that that's probably the way we are hardwired, because we're hardwired for life in society, in large groups. And that kind of a group, if the leadership was benevolent and constructive, that group would be probably the reliable cohort. You know what I mean? So, they failed, but they didn't fail because they're stupid. They failed because something that normally shouldn't happen happened, that we have a pathogenic and malicious leadership at this moment who pulled a fast one on everybody. And so, then you have, maybe that's a natural normal, that in a population you always have a group of people who are trusting and cooperative, and then you also have rabble rousers, so that like when things are bobbing along in the right direction, it's the cooperative, compliant ones which are like the solid rock of society. Whereas when things take the turn into like when the society takes the wrong turn, it's maybe people like ourselves who are more skeptical and less trusting, who are capable of putting corrective pressure on the whole group, on the whole community. So maybe it's supposed to be that way. We shouldn't. Maybe God made us the way we are for a reason, and maybe we should just all embrace that and be thankful that we are perhaps resilient for varying and differing circumstances. For we have corrective action in the sunny weather as well as when we hit stormy patches.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the G word, God, because that was actually one of the questions I was gonna ask you. Because there's a lot of people throughout this whole event and this whole COVID era that it changed their worldviews either drastically or at least a little bit in regards to maybe forcing them to think about things that they didn't really ponder on much, like spirituality, good versus evil, these type of narratives that maybe a lot of people didn't believe in or take seriously. And then when COVID happened, it seemed like a lot of people who would never use the word spiritual were saying that they're spiritual, or people who were atheists were now saying like they didn't like using that term. They weren't, comfortable using that term. It didn't really explain how they felt. And did you have any, like, did it have any effect on you in regards to like your worldview or spirituality, or were you always a spiritual person, or did it make you less spiritual, more spiritual? What was the effect on you in regards to your worldview?
It didn't change my worldview in that sense, because I went through that transition a long time ago. I grew up in socialism, one party communist system, and but to a Catholic family. My grandmother was very Catholic. She wanted us to go to Sunday school and to church every Sunday and all of that. But she made a big mistake once, because when I asked her like okay, so if there's God, how come I can never see him? And then she told me, and I was very little, she told me, well, God is very big. That's why you can't see him. And then she also said, like, we are very big. So the ants are very small and we are very big. So the ants cannot see us. And the same way we cannot see God, because we are very small and he's very big. I thought, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, how do we know that the ants can't see us? And the mountain over there is big and I can see it, and the moon is big and I can see it. So sorry, doesn't fly. And then, when I started going to school, the curriculum was very Marxist centric, and we were encouraged to be atheist, to not go along with the church teachings. And I think that for most of my teenage years, I considered myself atheistic. And then it struck me, maybe when I was 18 or 19 years old, that actually it would probably be more correct to, call myself agnostic, because, like, I don't think there's God, but I don't know that there isn't a God. So never mind that. Agnostic is, more correct as a position. And it was like in my mid-20s that something happened in my head. We could talk about that for 10 hours, so I'll skip the whole thing. But let's say that I moved, my dial has moved to where, if somebody asks me if I believe in God, I say no, I do not. I know. And so that happened almost 30 years ago, and it's always changed that way. I still don't go to church, because I don't think that my conception of God is not related to church teachings. It's just something that kind of came from within at some moment, in my life. But I would say that, that faith probably is entirely consistent with the core teachings of Christianity and the core teachings of Islam, and maybe most major religions, Zen and so forth. So when COVID-19 came about, it didn't really change that part of me, but obviously it brought front and center how actually extremely important it is that we embrace spiritual side of society, and individually as well. And then, like in researching history, you also find that totalitarian systems always try to erase God from the equation, or to impose false gods, and that liberation always goes along with return to religion, liberation, emancipation. And you see that today. You see that, there's, for some weird reason, there's a real serious, genuine growth of these satanic cults. It's like somebody's funding this, and they're becoming more vocal and more prominent. And at the same time, you see in other centers of powers like Russia, a more deliberate return to religion. It's like a deliberately made a part of the renaissance of the society, of getting it back to health. So it's clearly extremely important. And I think that the effect of COVID, again, has been positive in the unintended way. I think that it woke a lot of people to the importance of that aspect of us.
Yeah, and do you think the return to religion, or why a lot of imperialistic people throughout history try to remove a religion, is because of, like, we use the term big brother, right? It's like, well, if I can have faith in a higher being, like a higher being is looking after me, then I don't need big brother, right? But if but if you remove that higher being, or that spirituality, or whatever it may be, where you feel like you don't need government, like you remove spirituality and religion, then you need government, right? Is that the link between the two? Is that just a part of the technique in regards to control?
I think that's a part of it, but I think it goes way, way deeper than that, because spirituality or religious belief is our true north. If you understand that, then you can't be spun around and manipulated in any old direction. If you believe that we belong on this earth, that we were made by God, or if you like, you can call it nature or whatever, but that we are a part of an intended part of the design, the way it was meant to be, then you're much less susceptible to the ideologies that say, oh, we're going to have this great reset and it's going to change what it means to be human, and free will, that's over, and everybody's going to become a hackable animal. And, if there's no God in the equation, if there's no higher purpose, then all of that is fair game, right? You can say that, oh, okay, I guess, and then, something made us into the way we are, which means predominantly men and women who are fertile and have children and procreate the species and so forth. Well, if you take out the spiritual side, if you take out God, then you can have 76 genders, and boys can become girls and girls can become boys, and maybe technology will deliver us from this archaic sexual intercourse which is required for procreation, and maybe we can have just people in white lab coats selecting the traits. And I've seen literally, I think it was an MIT scientist in some panel discussion, I forget his name, he really deserved to be famous, who was saying that in order to save the planet and prevent climate change and all these things, that we should engineer people to be like 30% smaller than we are. Like we should like try to engineer small people for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm sure that they have very compelling papers written about it somewhere. But you see, it's the rejection of God creates the vacuum that then attracts these kinds of people who think that they can take the role of God, and then everything's fair game. You can shrink people, you can invent 70 genders, you can turn boys into girls and vice versa. And so without that true north, we really are on the road to perdition. And then the most amazing thing that I came across was when somebody ran a poll, and the question in the poll was, is it true that some men can get pregnant, right? So if you run that poll in any traditional society, they'll just laugh you out of town, right? And here, a very substantial percentage of people answered that yes, and particularly people with university education. So I kind of went through the numbers of the polls, and I like recalculated, repackaged them, and it turns out that university education doubles the risk of you answering yes to such an absurd question. And so that's where this belief in no, not belief, but this is where the doubt that there is God, that there is a higher purpose, that there is a higher power, and so forth. This is where it's kind of cultivated, and this is where you have people like Charles, what's his face, the selfish gene guy. I forget his name. He also deserves to be famous. Well, he is famous. But anyway, like Steven Pinker and
Richard Dawkins,
Richard Dawkins,
Christopher Hitchens, and
yeah, all those kinds of people who can contrive extremely convincing sounding arguments that the secondary effect of that is that everything's fair game. We can have GMOs, we can turn boys into girls, we can just re-engineer humanity to whatever degenerates in power think that they would like to see next. And then if they don't like it, they change their mind, and then they go in a different direction.
well, it's funny because I don't know where I heard this, but it was pretty hilarious. They're like, so you get somebody who doesn't believe in miracles and believes that it's all horseshit, and then they're like, Oh, by the way, to believe in my theory, you have to believe in the Big Bang Theory, which is the first biggest miracle ever. Because you believe like this, my theory makes sense, and you require no miracles as long as you believe the first and the biggest and probably most unbelievable miracle, that one giant bang created
Yeah.
everything. So it's like it's hysterical. It doesn't make any sense. And really, it's funny because when I'm very much like you. I went to Sunday school. My parents are Catholic. We're being raised Portuguese, born in Portugal, raised in a Portuguese community. So constantly around churches and people who were Catholics. But like many Catholics, we're not the strictest religious people who are constantly reading scripture and can regurgitate it and all that type of stuff. Like they just believe and they go to church and they're good people and they do what's right, but they're not like the most strictest people. And so as a curious kid, I would ask questions and I would get similar type of very unusual answers back that made no sense to me, and which made me think like this whole thing makes no sense. Like, it pushed me away because I'm like, there's no logic in what they're saying. They can't even explain in a logical way and then it made me think like, oh, you're just believing for the sake of believing because this answer doesn't make sense. You're just trying to give me an answer, but you're just going along with it because you're looking for or they're just it's that term like, oh, you have to have faith, you believe faith. And I'm just like, well, what is this faith thing? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I want a logical, concrete answer, something I can truly understand. And it did push me away. And I got really, I got obsessed with Christopher Hitchens. I got obsessed with Richard Dawkins and all these people. Christopher Hitchens, but he was one of the ones that initially I'm like, oh, I left a team, the Catholic team, and I went to a group that I thought wasn't tribalistic. And then I realized like, oh, I just left a team to go to another team. They're equally as tribalistic. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and they have blinders on in their logic and thinking, just like the religious people that they're, pointing fingers at and judging. And I remember Christopher Hitchens, because this was one of the parts that really made me kind of second guess, his motives and how, how well thought out his opinions are and what were the motives behind those opinions. Because he wrote the book, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, which was a great book. There's also a great documentary of the same title, which basically has all the information or a lot of the information from the book. And, this guy, he understood a lot about war propaganda and all this stuff. But and then when it came down to like Iraq and the Middle East, he was all for it. And I'm just like, wait, you're a guy who wrote about Henry Kissinger. You know that most of the wars that we were sold, the reasons why we got involved in conflicts or didn't get involved in conflicts, or why we helped one country and didn't help another country, were all like based on lies and based on propaganda. But yet your hatred towards religious people have blinded you that you are all for the Iraq war, even though it made no logical sense, and you knew, or you should know, that they were using the same type of war propaganda that they used in the past. And it's just like, it hit me that I'm like, oh my God, this guy, his dislike of religion has completely blinded him to see, other things like, the war propaganda that they were using to justify Middle Eastern intervention. And it was the first time that I'm like, okay, this guy, there's some flaws in his thinking. And there, as I got older, I'm thinking, well, religious people say there's a creator, right? And I'm like, well, that term's kind of a good term, because the same way that like religious people don't have answers to all my questions, people who believe in evolution also don't have answers to all my questions. Like there must be a creator, right? Oh no, this is how it started. Okay, but who made that? Where did that come from? Well, it started here, and I'm like, okay, well, what came before that? There must have been something that turned into something that turned into something. So everything was created at some point, somewhere, at some time. So the whole idea of like the Big Bang Theory and all, and all in the evolution theory, I'm like, there's holes in that too. And then you realize like, okay, the truth is none of us really know, but we're all seeking to know. Like we all, like I think it's
Yeah,
inherent in
yeah,
us to try to want to know our own origin story, and that's why I think the UFO conversation is so interesting, because I think it throws a curveball into like the way we painted history and the way we think of history. Now it's like, well, what about if those, those drawings on the wall that look like a UFO and an alien talking to civilizations? What if that isn't just like imaginary? What if that was inspired by real events? And what if at some point there are other civilizations that have crossed paths? So yeah, it's all super, interesting. And to me, to think that we just live on this floating earth, which is a miracle, alone, just thinking about just if you look at the planet and the world, even at the most materialistic, not below surface, above surface, normal way, it's still pretty insane, when you think about it. So it's like, where do you stop? And then you keep expanding and you keep thinking and pondering and wondering. And I think at some point, if you do ask those questions and if you're curious enough, spirituality will pop up at some point.
oh yeah, yeah. I think it was John von Neumann who was I think he was mathematician, who had a great quote. It said, "The first sip out of the cup of science will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God waits for you."
Oh, I love.
And here's how I made sense of not that quote, but like how I arrived at my let's call it spiritual awakening. Basically, I was in university and I was studying biology, and I used to love biology, and I was kind of very avid in reading whatever I could get my hands on, and I got into like small minutia of how cells divide. And so, science already, this is in the 1990s, had very, very detailed explanations, except not all of it could be explained. Like there were moments in the life of a cell where something miraculously happens, but the science doesn't know how or why. And then, like that kind of just got me thinking about these cell divisions, that we actually all originate from a fertilized egg, just one single cell. And we all develop into a full-grown human, and we all look similar. So that means that one cell contains all the information necessary to grow an adult human. I thought, like, wow, isn't that amazing? And then, so that I kind of pondered that in my head for a while. And then, very near to that time, I saw an interview with an elderly scientist, because something happened, allegedly. Some asteroid dropped on Antarctica, right? And this went, there was the first Iraq War, so this went under the radar for the media, but there was some talk about this because apparently they found traces of organic material on that asteroid. And so that, for the scientific community, this was like, oh, wow, this came from space, yet it had signs of life on it. And this elderly scientist said something that struck me very deeply. And what he said was, that is evidence that life will form where it can. Okay. And then, the next piece of the puzzle came for me through, trying to understand quantum mechanics. And I don't understand quantum mechanics, but I listened to some scientists try to explain it. And one thing that I did pick up is that they said that the probability of subatomic particles coming together and forming atoms is so infinitesimally small. It's like it's practically an impossibility. Yet not only do they come together and form atoms, and then these atoms form molecules, and then these molecules form bigger and bigger things. and then you get to, life, and then you get to cells, and then you get this fertilized cell that becomes a whole human. That all of this is so unlikely that it seems, in mathematical terms, it seems like an impossibility. It's like they said, it's like one in. It's like so many zeros that it's almost inconceivable. Yet it happens, and not only does it happen once or twice, it happens all the time. It's robust. It's pervasive. And if it's true what this scientist said, it's present in all matter, meaning that, like if life will form where it can, that means that all matter in the universe carries in it some kind of a quality that makes it go from elemental particles into structures of greater and greater complexity, but not random. They have a structure, they have a meaning, they're going in a certain direction. And so, that would be the equivalent of, a tornado blowing through a junkyard and assembling a car or a computer. That, like that in this system that we believe is characterized by entropy, that just wouldn't happen. But imagine the reality where it happens all the time. So, the way I made my mind about this is that I think that what we call God is not some elderly bearded man sitting in a cloud deciding whose wishes to fulfill and whose wishes not to fulfill. I think that it's a quality or a force that's present in every tiniest particle of everything that exists in the universe, and which is then obviously what has formed us. An implication is that it's part of us. We are it, and it is us, and it is absolutely everywhere. And everything around us is part of that same creation. And so, to me, that led me to a certainty that God exists, only maybe not the way, it's conceived by major religions, which are, thousands of years old. So, maybe the level of knowledge and imagination that has led to those parables and stories was, something that we can do a bit better now with. Not to say that Islam and Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and Zoroastrianism are wrong. It's just that they explain the same essential truths in a different way, in a way that at the time was probably more digestible to the people and that, brought people together. But I think that that very same reality today can be explained in a different way.
That's interesting because that is a common argument that atheists say, that like, oh, you can't all be right, right? Because one thinks that they have the book that explains the origin of man, and another one thinks they have the book and the scriptures that explain the origin of man. But like you said, maybe none of them are wrong, and maybe they're all basically saying the same thing. They're not all saying that, different things. They're not all, we don't have to have that perception that like, okay, only one of them can be correct, the other ones must be all wrong. Maybe they're all saying the same thing, but due to the culture of the time, the way they explain things at the time, the interpretation of things, the outcome or the way they end up explaining those origin stories or just those past stories are just different.
Yeah, and I think that they all overlap over the center. You know what I mean? Like the stuff that matters, they all generally are in agreement with, and then they diverge over things that you can ascribe to, historical episodes, circumstance, different times, different places, different kinds of people, different cultures. All of those stories that end up in the Bible, they all have a long history before the Bible. So people who were writing the Bible, use those stories. Yeah, I wouldn't give I don't give that much of an importance to that, and that I think that those things, the peripheral parts of the story is what lost me, and by the sound of it, it's what lost you as well. But as you delve into to the essence of things, I think that it's all remarkably consistent, and I think that it all converges on the truth that there is a higher power and that we're all part of it and that we are all it, in fact.
Well, it's you ever watch the documentary Zeitgeist, by Peter Joseph? Though, yeah. So
Yeah, 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 I have.
they were
But
great.
but so long ago that now I wouldn't remember what it
Yeah.
said.
Well,
But it was an eye opener. I do remember that.
yeah, it was a hell of a eye opener. I remember giving out DVDs, copies of it to friends and family because I'm like, this is going to change the way you look at the world. And I'm like, I thought it was that profound of a piece of work, and the way that he put it all together was beautiful and could really
Yeah.
impact people. But the beginning of the first one, right? So the first one was basically because you had Zeitgeist, then you had Zeitgeist 2, which was, I think, Zeitgeist Addendum, and they talked a lot about the banking system and that type of stuff. And they had Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which was the third one, when they basically had a lot of similar concepts to like the Venus Project and that type of futuristic possibility. But the first one, when you look at the beginning of it, right, and it eventually goes into 9/11 and it goes into Pearl Harbor and some of the other historical events and talks about false flags, but initially it talks about religion, and it talks about how all these stories have been told throughout civilizations prior to before these religions were even a thing, before they even existed. Similar stories of a god who and then the resurrection, and all these similar stories were told. And I think Peter Joseph's motive for that was because in the first one, he was trying to explain how the elite, or those on top of the pyramid, on top of the ladder, how they control the masses, right? And how they use religion to control the masses. So in a way, he put it in the film to almost discredit religion and discredit these stories. But now, looking back at it and reflecting on it, I almost think my interpretation would be different. I almost feel like the fact that these stories have been told over and over again almost give it more credit, not less credit, right?
Yes. Okay, so with regard to Zeitgeist, I saw the first film. I didn't see the second one. So I don't know what I can't reply directly in terms of what they say in the film, but it has been a very recent kind of insight that came to me about this. And I agree with you, because I remember hearing somebody who said that the Christian Mass, or the Catholic Mass, is a miracle. And when I first heard that, I thought, like, what a joke. And I'm somebody who can barely stay awake through a mass, right? In fact, that's part of why I don't go to church, because I can't quite, I never learned the ritual. So I almost feel guilty, because that there's all these people around me who know how it goes, know what to say, know what to sing, when to get up, when to sit down. And I usually just sit there waiting for the time to pass and yawning and being bored out of my head. So I you know, I, I the notion that ritual is a miracle in any sense, to me, was laughable, until I kind of got into the research of what actually happened in Judea 2,000 years ago. And then I realized that this actually is a miracle. That story is being perpetuated for more than 2,000 years and holding people together, and representing some kind of a true north to the Christian communities. that is a miracle, because Jesus wasn't the first nor the last man who was crucified by the Romans. He wasn't the first nor the last man who rebelled against the Roman abuse, or against King Herod was essentially Zelensky of Judea, Juan Guaido of Judea, and he was the a vassal of the Roman Empire and of the Roman moneylenders, making life of the Jewish people in Judea intolerable. And so obviously there's going to be political reaction against that. So that was happening before. So there was something different about this story. And then it went on to live for 2,000 years. Okay, so now I can accept that there is something pretty miraculous about that. Even though the church itself failed in many ways. They've diverged quite a bit from Jesus's original message. They've also had a very strange tendency to always be on the wrong side of history. I don't know why, but for some reason it did. They also, one of the massive problems of that era was usury. And Islam and Christianity had prescriptions against usury, yet the Vatican essentially dealt in money lending over its history. And so it seems that the church had its history, which is extremely controversial and problematic, but that one essential message was kept pure and consistent for 2,000 and some years. Okay, that's very interesting, and I think maybe that does qualify it as a miracle in some way.
That is interesting. Now, how does, because I feel like the paths of our origin story and the UFO conversation cross paths, right? Like the Ancient Alien series on TV got a lot of laughs, and a lot of people are like, oh, look, they're just seeing a bunch of crazy stuff on caves and connecting dots. And to some sense, it seems like, some of it was entertainment and they were making it seem really sexy. But as people become more and more open-minded to possibly life on another planet or from somewhere else, a different universe, a metaverse, who knows? How does that affect your worldview? And is that something you've thought about? Like, just like how, could there be, life on another planet? If there is, how does that fit? How does that puzzle piece fit into my worldview, and how, in my spirituality, and how, all these things? Is it another topic similar to, some people believe that, like we were saying before, some people believe they try to remove spirituality and religion out of out of society, out of culture, because it's much easier to make us materialistic people who are easy to control. Do you think maybe some of these topics, like, life on other planets, was also suppressed because, according to some of these whistleblowers, they've been capturing and maybe even reverse engineering stuff since like the 30s? Do you think that would it all seems like it's a common goal of getting us to believe we're in this box, and everything outside this box either doesn't exist or doesn't matter, and it's all about this material planet and this material world? And if it's aliens, or if it's religion or spirituality, I think the one thing they all have in common, it makes you ask the bigger questions, and it forces you to kind of think outside your box and zoom out, and, like I said, ask those bigger questions, and really almost make you feel like the little things you're stressing about and the material things you want seem insignificant. What's your thoughts on all that?
No, I definitely agree with that. And the way I, like I thought about aliens a little bit, but not very much because in actual reality, I don't give it that much importance because first of all, we don't know whether or not there were aliens who visited our planet or not, whether they had any interaction with us, whether they were instrumental in creating our civilizations, whether they walk around us, who knows? There's a lot of talk about it, but you know, so far nothing that would convince me. But going back to the notion that life arises out of this force in nature that makes matter self-assemble into meaningful and beautiful structures, and then those into even more, it always coalesces into something bigger. Well, I expect that the same matter is dispersed throughout the universe, and that it makes all of the universe. And given that there are billions or maybe hundreds of billions of galaxies out there, and then therefore probably trillions of things that resemble our solar system, and the notion that if the matter has this quality to self-organize and self-assemble, that then life will form where it can, then I think it's not unreasonable to believe that there is life on other planets. Now, whether they could have made the track over, found our planet, and interacted with us, there I have to say I would be agnostic to that idea, but maybe or maybe not. There's no reason to eliminate it and just say like, no, that's impossible. Why would it be impossible? Maybe it's unlikely, but it's certainly not impossible. But going back again to how life arises, where it comes from, then even if these aliens came and visited us, it would imply that they themselves are God's creation. And maybe unless there's some kind of a spatial reincarnation of the Roman Empire, maybe there's no need to assume that they would be hostile to us. I don't know, but maybe we'll find out one day. Definitely, what these subtle disclosures from out of the CIA, FBI, these congressional testimonies, I don't believe a word of it. I think it's all, psyops and manipulations.
That's always the concern. I think Joe Rogan said that. He's like, I believed in UFOs until the government started believing in UFOs.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
I'm so skeptical of why they're having. I mean, I don't know if maybe they're concerned about it's just can't be. You can't lie about it for much longer, or like eventually the truth's going to come out, or they're just like slowly releasing this information so people can kind of digest it at a slower rate, and it be easier for us to kind of accept this this narrative and this worldview that there is life on another planet. And because then, like, again, it sparks all these other conversations like, okay, are they a threat to us? If you're into geopolitics and you're in the military, you're thinking like, okay, are they a threat to us? If you're a spiritual person, you're thinking like, okay, are they all, like you said, are they also a creation of God or some other being? There's so many other angles. If you're not a spiritual person, doesn't make you think like, okay, the way I look at the world is materialistic, and this now completely blows things, blows the lid off things, and now I have to rethink what I understand about time and space and technology. And that's a part of science that I find fascinating, is the fact that there's some scientists that are just so confident that they understand the way the universe works. And I tend to believe, like, we're one great thinker away from like realizing we misunderstood the universe as a whole. We misunderstood time and gravity and, whatever it may be, and, just to me, it sparks all these other conversations. And that's what I find fascinating. And I think a long time ago, when people would talk about aliens and UFOs, there wasn't a lot of evidence. There's a lot of crazy people involved in those topics. Like, I remember Project Camelot was one of the, alternative media groups that would do a lot of interviews with people who were abducted by aliens and people who talked about another species on the moon. And they would be so certain about how many alien species there are, like, oh, so there's these type of people and that, and I'm like, oh my god, they're all effing crazy. Like, what are you talking about? I've had some of those people reach out to me, like people will send me, oh, you should have this person on your podcast, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, let me do a little bit of research, and then next thing I'm like, okay, they're a spiritual person, okay, and then I'm like, let me see a couple of their interviews, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I'm a galactic representative of the whatever, race. And I'm like, what are you talking? But then I'm like, I'm so skeptical that I'm like, you know what? Let me listen to this for a little bit, because what if I'm wrong? Well, because I've been on that end where people look at me like I'm crazy, or you start talking about vaccines back in the day, you talk about, child trafficking, pedophilia, people look at you like you're the crazy person. So I'm like, okay, I've been on that side, so let me at least entertain it. And for a long time, it was like, no, this is just legitimately crazy people. But now I do feel myself like slowly, like, okay, maybe I'm becoming more open-minded with age, or maybe as more you uncover more and more crazy things that you thought couldn't have that much truth to, you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I'm not gonna dismiss anything, like give me the craziest theory and I'll at least listen. I'll listen, and I'm gonna listen, and I'll entertain it, because I've been that person who I could tell somebody's looking at me like I'm telling them there's people who live on the moon, so um it's fascinating. I think that the topic is fascinating now more than ever, because you're having less and less crazy people talk about it, and more. I mean, even if, who knows, maybe like you said, it could be all a psyop, but it seems like more respectful, open-minded, legitimately people who don't seem to have a reason to or wouldn't be categorized as a crazy person are coming out and entertaining this topic.
Well, I think that, okay, so first of all, to set aside everything that's coming from the government, I think all of it is psyops. I think that they are now at the stage of throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks. They are desperate to create a hysteria. They're desperate for us to be afraid of stuff. They keep inventing invisible enemies that we need to all unite against, and give more power to the government and let them rescue us from, viruses and climate change. And, who knows, maybe aliens might fit the bill. So, they try this, see what happens. But lately, nothing is happening. I don't know if you noticed, but it was a few months ago that they declared the monkeypox a global pandemic. Nothing happened. Now, a few weeks ago, they were talking about some COVID or bird flu, something or other coming from Scandinavia, and it's so deadly. And then, the whole thing just vanished. Nothing happened. I think that more and more people are now unimpressed with the climate change agenda. And so, for the same low price, let's throw the aliens in the mix and see what happens. And nothing is happening. But, my ex-wife used to, she was also, Christian, but she also tried to, in her search for meaning, went to a number of these people who claim to have contact with, outer powers and, whatever strange things. and she went through several of these, gurus or guardians or representatives of this and that. And then she would encourage me to watch and listen and even go to these workshops. I couldn't really avoid it. And well, okay, so some of them were like absolutely to be dismissed, just like crazy, crazy shit. But some of them, had like a sen like a core spiritual teaching. And then they had the narrative about, you know, the the realities of the universe and explanations that did involve other realms or other planets and other species or whatever. And I always thought, like, I find the spiritual dimension of this completely consistent with the way I see the world. But this other narrative part of it, the best I can do is just be agnostic, because whatever they're saying seems to be their truth. They sound earnest. They seem like they mean what they're saying, but I can't tell whether that's true or not. It could be their own illusion. So my own thoughts is that I don't really care. I I deeply care about the spiritual core of any such system of belief. Whether it involves, beings from other realms, whether it involves beings from other planets, I don't frankly know what to do with that. Unless, unless one day I met an actual alien and they could prove to me that they're from a different planet and they explain to me what planet they're from and how they got here, maybe that could push me to be a believer. But, short of that, I find it difficult because, these narratives are very imaginative, but I don't know where they come from.
Yeah, that's kind of where my stance on the topic for a long time. That's why people would ask me to do like shows on aliens or UFO, and I'm like, who do I talk to, and where do I go with this conversation? Because it's like it's all kind of just theories, and nobody, it's like their own personal experience. There's no real like evidence or anything I could really sink my teeth in, So yeah, so it is a topic that typically I didn't, get into too much. I do find the whole technology thing interesting because obviously the pyramids and how they were created and all these old civilizations that were building things we can't really explain on how they built them. And I think that does lead me into thinking like, okay, some technology is either suppressed or some technology has been lost, some understanding of the way things work has been lost. And really, this kind of goes back to, like we're saying, like everything's about controlling the masses. And it's like, okay, well, now we give you the technology that you can use, and this is the only thing that exists, and that way we can control that thing, and we can control a market. So that to me, that part of it is kind of fascinating. But one thing before we run out of time, because it is an interesting topic that uh, I haven't done a show on, and it seems to be kind of now losing traction a little bit, and I'm curious why. But the Wagner group and what happened in Russia a while ago, and what seemed to be a coup or what was going on, um, was a topic, and everybody was kind of, talking about it, and then out of nowhere, it kind of just disappeared. Did you follow that story closely? And did you know much about those groups and those characters that were involved in that story before what happened, and what happened? Because now, like, nobody's talking about it, and it's like, okay, so there was a coup allegedly, and now everybody's just back to normal and hanging out and just like, what was it? Was that a psyop? Was it not a psyop?
Yeah, I am convinced that that was a psyop, Ricky. I did follow that story closely. I was aware of Wagner's role in Ukraine, And as somebody who has served in the military during the war, I found it extremely strange that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner group, would be able to openly and publicly criticize the top brass of the Russian military in the middle of a war. I've never come across an example of that, and as a soldier, I know that they'll be severely punished. Yet he was doing this for weeks. It wasn't like this happened once. He was doing this for weeks. He would be posting public videos, yelling insults at people who were essentially his higher ups. And so I thought there's something very strange about this. And then when he staged that coup, one thing that was clear is that a coup of that nature wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding. So that anybody would even attempt it, they would have to be very stupid. They would have to be extremely rash. You could say, well, it's war, these people are traumatized, the emotions run high. All of that is true. But still, that would be suicidal. That would be stuff for court-martial and possibly a life sentence or death sentence. So the fact that Yevgeny Prigozhin, after 6 weeks of ranting, orchestrated, quote unquote, a coup, I thought that was extremely strange. And then it was even stranger that basically nothing happened to him. He's still a free man. He's still the head of Wagner or somehow involved. And he's still very active. They're supposedly stationed in Belarus. He is involved in talking to the leaders of African countries that are preparing to defend themselves against the coming attempt of the Western imperial, colonial powers to reestablish control. So I thought that was a psyop. I thought that the whole thing was fake. I thought that it's inconceivable that this wasn't pre-planned by Prigozhin and Putin and Shoigu. And I know that in the aftermath of his first very public rant, that there was a private meeting between Prigozhin and Putin and Shoigu. I think that's the only explanation that makes sense to me. And why they went ahead with this, I think that the reason why they did this, let's say that the biggest risk to Vladimir Putin and his government at this moment is the risk of assassination. And through history, we know that these quote unquote tyrants, these autocratic leaders, are very, very much at risk of assassination by the oligarchies. Because, so there's a category of leaders throughout history that, in our curriculum, they're called tyrants, but they're actually autocratic leaders who emerge to put an end to oligarchic abuse, because the oligarchies tend to turn extremely rapacious. And they like to have heads of state that are weak and subservient to them, which is basically what we get with our democracies. In Russia, Vladimir Putin has emerged as a leader who can line up the oligarchs, set the rules of the game, which is what happened in 2003. He got all the oligarchs for a meeting and he told them, carry on, run your businesses, enjoy your wealth, but A, treat your employees correctly, pay them correctly. B, pay your taxes correctly. C, most importantly, stay out of politics. And then when one of them, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, blundered back into politics, he just simply had him thrown into jail where he stayed for the next 9 years. And so that was a message, there's a power above the oligarchy. In the West, in the democratic, in the Western liberal democracy, it's inconceivable that, Justin Trudeau or Joe Biden or, Rishi Sunak can line up their own oligarchs and tell them how things are going to be. So the oligarchies hate this, and the oligarchies tend to unite and align themselves with other oligarchies to make sure that leaders like this don't exist. Basically, that is the same story that's behind the assassination of Julius Caesar. That's how far back those traditions go. And many, many such leaders have been assassinated by the oligarchies. And so I think that for Vladimir Putin and his government, the really grave danger that could unravel everything would be an assassination. And so I think that Prigozhin's role was to emerge as a powerful man who's close to Putin, who might be, let's say, convertible to the cause of the oligarchy, that they could approach and say, like, hey, Mr. Prigozhin, you can get close to Putin. I think that, we can have better freedom and democracy if we orchestrate a coup, an assassination, whatever. And maybe you're our man. Maybe you're the one who can make this happen for us. So I think that to avert this risk, that Prigozhin played the role of the magnet for anybody with such impulses or such intentions to draw out the fifth column. That's the only way I can explain why he was able to do the stunts that he did, and why he was left alive, not only alive, but he was left as the head of Wagner. And then the other way that I think is consistent with this explanation is that Prigozhin was essentially a petty thug who suddenly became an extremely powerful and important person in Russia. It's clear that he would have been vetted to no end to make sure that he's the right kind of stuff, that he's reliable, that he's loyal, because he was like a small businessman. He was arrested for some criminal activity. Then somehow he became, quote unquote, Putin's chef. He was be serving food to Putin at these state dinners. That's a very high expression of confidence, because Putin could be poisoned. So, the man who will serve you food is obviously going to be somebody that you trust. Somehow he earned that trust. I don't know how, but I suspect that the reason was the way he ended up in prison was he got busted for some criminal activity. And I think that maybe what distinguished him, that he didn't rattle off on his accomplices. I'm guessing, I'm speculating, but somehow he did earn that trust. And then from being his, quote unquote, his chef, he becomes this military persona running a very, very important military structure that, we say that these are mercenaries, but they're not really mercenaries. They do work for the Russian state. They're just outside of the official military command and control structures because they need to act more nimbly and more flexibly in various theaters of war. So anyway, Ricky, that's my explanation. I have not heard that explanation by anybody, but I think I can't imagine that I'm wrong about it. Let's say.
Do you how do you see this whole Ukraine Russia US conflict ending? Because it's like we just keep sending money that it's US taxpayers money, and the money's just going into U.S. corporations, because apparently the Ukrainians are buying the bombs and weapons and stuff from our military companies. So we're just taking it from the people and giving it to the corporations. And in America, there's people who are struggling to buy groceries, and we're just constantly sending millions and millions of dollars over there. And obviously, we're being sold this idea that we're winning and Russia's on their heels, but the truth is it's not going in that direction at all. How do you see it ending? Have you thought about that? Like, have a prediction, or do you think that at some point they will just run out of money, or the military companies will pump the brakes and be like, okay, we've made enough money off this conflict? Like, how do you see it ending? Do you see a optimistic conclusion to this, or are you not so optimistic?
Well, first the thing that jumped out was that no, I don't expect that any corporation will ever say we've made enough money. That's not going to happen. But I think that the war is lost for the West, and I think that I like to always remind people of something that George Soros quite rightly laid out in his address to the World Economic Forum in Davos 2 years ago. And he said that what we're experiencing is a conflict between two models of governance. That's really it. So one model of governance is the Western oligarchic, colonial, imperialistic system of governance that basically sees everything as resource, including human beings, and wants every single person to be like a slave or an indentured debt servant, or a serf, whatever you want to call it, and sees all the rest of the earth as a source of natural wealth for them to extract, to financialize, and to turn into wealth and power for themselves. And what they're opposed to is the whole rest of the humanity, which includes populations in the West, American people, British people, French people, everybody. It's just that at this moment in history, two major powers have emerged who are strong enough that they can resist the diktat of this imperial cabal. And those are Russia and China. And so the war in Ukraine is a war which pretty much the West has imposed on Russia. Russians were unable to avoid it. They had to take it on. And the objective of that war was to try to weaken and destabilize Russia, to drag it into a quagmire, to try to then provoke a revolt of the Russian people that would lead to a regime change, and ultimately to a partition of Russia. So, simply, this empires never tolerated rivals. Never in history. They always had to go out and eliminate every rival, because there is no limit to the empire's ambition. The goal is always to conquer the whole earth. And so they wanted to destroy Russia and partition it, to remove Vladimir Putin, who was able to unite the Russians and make Russia strong again. And then after eliminating Russia as a rival, then they would move on to doing the same to China. And then, they could, cross the T's and dot the I's on their world domination. Well, you remember 20 years ago, they actually formulated this as the project for the new American century, full spectrum dominance. They wrote all that black and white, and that their objective was to eliminate all rivals. So this is what we're seeing today. Ukraine was intended to be that proxy to destroy Russia, and unfortunately for the Western oligarchy, the war is lost. I think that if they don't manage to somehow get to Vladimir Putin personally and assassinate him, they have lost the war and they have lost their gambit to try to rule the world. That whole American century, full spectrum dominance, that's gone. And I think that this is extremely good news for all the rest of the humanity. It'll take a while, and we might have to go through a bumpy period. But, the characteristic of the empires through history is that they tend to create misery at home and permanent warfare abroad. Warfare costs a lot of money. So they have to apply heavy-handed exploitation on domestic population. Imagine if all these hundreds of billions of dollars that went to Ukraine were used to build schools and hospitals and save cities and industrialize the United States, fix up the infrastructure, make the life of American people better, rather than use the money to wage war across the planet. And, in fact, this system of governance has been doing the same thing forever. And the end of it will be good news for everybody. And I think that we've come to the end of it. And I'm pretty convinced, I'm pretty sure that the leadership in Russia today and in China, and also in some other countries like Iran and India, they are now very fully aware of what they're up against. That it's not going to do to just, defeat Ukraine's army in Ukraine and, to give themselves a better security architecture in Europe. I think that they all understand that they have to go all the way, that they have to completely disenfranchise this oligarchy to rout them out and to destroy their system, basically the system by which they've been able to rule the world for the last few hundred years. So I think that we're coming at the end of this matrix, and I think that the new system of governance, the new way of being, the new reality that we're going to have is to a large extent going to be up to us to construct. And I think it's going to be so far better than anything that we have known that I think it's going to be a surprise. But, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, Ricky, this is going to take a little bit of that athletic grit of persisting and carrying forward one foot in front of the other, even when you're in the middle of the tunnel and you don't quite know if the light is the exit or a coming train that's gonna take you there. You still go forward and fight for the right cause.
Well, that's a great optimistic way of ending this. It sounds like, maybe the world's not going to end with a giant explosion, and there's been a lot of conversation about nuclear war and whatnot. But is that something that ever concerns you, or do you think that strategy wise, geopolitically, there's with proxy wars and other ways of indirectly affecting each other, things wouldn't lead to that because they would just find other ways of indirectly being at war without ending the war, of course.
I think it is conceivable that we all end up frying in a nuclear holocaust. But we have to, that either will or won't happen. We don't know, because if it does happen, it might happen only as a result of some unlikely confluence of circumstances where somebody ends up pushing the button and then everything goes off. But that might not happen. And I tend to think that it's unlikely, because it doesn't make sense either. It doesn't even make sense. Nuclear weapons could wreak a great deal of destruction, but it can't win you a war. Okay, like you could flatten Russia, but a lot of Russians might survive long enough to. I mean, the Russians will launch retaliatory attacks, 100%. And by flattening Russia, you're going to end up also flattening Europe and the United States. So, what did you get? You didn't get anything out of it. It would be only if the degenerate, evil oligarchies, and they are degenerate and evil, at some point when they realize that they can't win the world, that they can't own the world, that they would rather destroy it for everybody than just go quietly into the night. But then, they don't know how to launch nuclear missiles. They would have to rely on other people who maybe prefer to live and have families and so forth. So maybe somebody in the hierarchy would say, no, we're not doing this. So that's why I think it's unlikely. But again, it might happen. At any rate, we have to carry forward on the assumption that that's not going to happen. We have to still, plant the crops and raise our children and go to work and do what we do on the assumption that there is a tomorrow and that there is going to be another tomorrow after that and so forth. So that would be one of those elements that, yes, it does concern me, but no, it doesn't affect how I go about my life. And I think it shouldn't, because, the only thing I feel that could do to me is to push me in a state of, pessimism and defeatism. And, then if you believe that that could be a possible outcome, then you could say, like, well, what the hell? Everything is pointless. We're all going to fry anyway. So, why bother? And that would be, I think, the only way for us actually to be defeated. If we acquiesce, if we just let ourselves passively be enslaved, that's I think the only way that we could fail to attain a better future at this juncture.
Now, for people who want to keep up with your work, are obviously you're on Twitter, your YouTube channel. Have you been posting any news content on your YouTube channel? Any of your research, maybe current interviews that you've done on other shows? I don't mind you promoting other shows. I think all your conversations that you have on my show or any show that you're ever interviewed on is always worth listening to. But for people who do want to keep up with more of your work, where are the best places? I know you also have a website, so definitely share that also.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. That's very kind. I do a lot of podcasts lately, but they're generally like this, just a chat, a conversation. I do have my own platforms. I think the easiest ones to find are, I'm on Twitter. My handle is @NakedHedgie. I have a Substack called Alex Krainer's Trend Compass. And then I do have a website for traders and investors, where I have my day job activities posted. It's called iSystem Trend Following. I have a YouTube channel, and I post regularly without fail, once every 8-9 months, maybe 10, 12, but definitely it's on the New Year's resolutions to become a little bit more active. But as you know, YouTube is a lot of work. Producing video is a lot of work, because when you write, like you write something, you post it. If you made a mistake, you go back, you edit, you correct. Videos, when they go out, they have to be perfect, because you can't edit them. You have to take them down and redo everything. So that's a lot of work, and that's why I haven't posted quite as much. But I do intend to go back to posting YouTube videos and so forth. But yeah, I think for the time being, easiest Substack and Twitter, and then from there, whoever is interested in other stuff, easy to find.
Yeah, you're pretty active on Substack, because I subscribe to your Substack, and I'm getting, I get emails pretty often. So definitely subscribe to that. I'll make sure to put that in the show description so people can keep up with that. And I love the fact that Substack is giving people another way of connecting with people and getting them information.
Yeah, and so far entirely censorship free.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
the interview with the guy who created it on Rogan's podcast, and he I believe he was on Rogan's podcast, and he seemed to have like I loved all the things he was saying, and I'm always like analyzing when people who are the founders of a new platform are being interviewed. I'm always analyzing like, okay, what's their worldview? How do they look at things? Like, because I'm curious, because I'm always curious of the same thing you're curious of, like, okay, how long until they start censoring, or maybe they're not going to start censoring. And he seems to be like a pretty legitimately good guy who believes in this platform and believes in giving people a place to write, and without other agendas or other marketing or whatever, pushing you in one direction or another or censoring you. So yeah, I like it. I'm all for platforms like that. I'm on Minds also. I don't use Minds, but my podcast is on Minds. And anytime I've seen an interview with the founder of Minds, he seems like another guy, seems like a really good guy, and I'm more than happy to post on his platform. I'm also on Substack, but we just put the audio podcast out there. But so I think people, that's getting a little more popular too. People are putting podcasts on Substack, and so yeah, it's a great platform, and I'm more than happy to support any platform that is giving us a opportunity to spread our wings and share our voices. So always a pleasure, Alex. Hopefully we do this again in the near future. Hopefully we'll have to get you on a future Union of the Unwanted episode. I know it's been a little bit, and it's tough because so you were in North America. You said you were in Canada. You ever come to like America, the USA, or you or
I haven't been since 2000, when? 2018, maybe 2016, I forget. Definitely before COVID. So yeah, my trip to Canada in June was the first time I went across the pond in a few years. But I believe that I will travel back to the United States again in the near future. I just don't have any plans at the moment.
Yeah. Well, if you're ever in the East Coast, hit me up, because I would definitely love to hang out and get you have a glass of wine and get you to chat a little bit, and I having casual conversations and in real life are always a blast. And so if you're ever in the East Coast.
Excellent. That would be awesome, Ricky, because I do see occasionally photographs of you hanging out with your friends. And I always say like, well, that looks like a group I'd probably have fun hanging out with. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like I don't know what it is about foreigners, but like I've just always been attracted to other foreigners. It's just I end up, a lot of my friends are from other countries. One of my best friends growing up, Renato Lemnetz, he was from Estonia. We actually became friends from playing basketball together, and he just happened to be born in Estonia, and we became really close, and have friends from Lebanon, from a lot of Polish. There's a Polish community where I live too. It's a lot of Portuguese and Polish, so a lot of Polish friends. Another great group of people. I mean, I love Polish people, just family oriented, great people. Fun to be around, and that's the beautiful thing too about being around so many foreigners and immigrants, is that you realize like there's a lot of similarities with all of us, and regardless, like if what we eat and drink is different, we all like to eat and drink together, and even like my Muslim friends, like I always talk about how much I love hookah, because hookah forces you to be social, right? Like you can't smoke hookah by yourself. It looks stupid. It's not as fun, but if you're with friends, you're around the hookah, everybody's trying the flavors. Hey, try this one, try that one. You're talking, you're eating, and I think that's why some of those traditions continue for so long. The reason why people.
Wait, Ricky, hookah is like that water pipe, no?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. We call that here shisha, but yeah. I know, that's fun, and that's very, that's very good for socializing. That's a lot of fun. I enjoy that too.
Yeah, because it forces everybody to kind of like sit around it, and then it forces you to be together. When you look at like a lot of American cultures, you go to a bar with with Americans, it's like everybody's staring at their phone. There's no pub culture anymore where people like sit around and debate and have conversations. It's like everybody. So it's like some of these traditions that continue for so long. Kind of going back to like we were talking about before, like there's a reason why these stories get told and retold again. And so there might be something there. I think some of these traditions is very similar. Like my dad makes 180 gallons of wine every year. He makes chorizo, which is just Portuguese sausage, so my family gets together. And it's not so much like you're not doing it because you're saving money, or you're not doing it because you think that it's superior to anything you can buy, because obviously there's good stuff out there, but you continue doing it because you enjoy the process of doing it. You enjoy being around the family. You enjoy having a reason to get people at the house and eat and drink together, and you're talking and whatnot. So my buddy, one of my best friends, Robbie, he's Lebanese, and he's not the strictest Muslim you ever met. He's not. He's very similar to like some of the Catholic people I grew up with, where it's like they're Catholic, but they're not that strict with the rules. But they but yet he still does the fasting. He does Ramadans. He does all that stuff, and it's like people will ask him like, why do you do it? And he's like, I just enjoy at the end of the night, when we can eat. The family's all together, the friends are all together, we're enjoying this meal together, and then it's you end up thinking of it like same reasoning for a lot of these traditions. It's like it's the one common thing is it brings people together. That's the most important.
Which is actually the most beautiful part of life, in fact.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm watching a sporting event or a big game or whatever, and I'm in the room by myself and a big play happens and there's nobody to cheer it on with, like, or get excited with, it's not as fun as if I have a room full of people who are all experiencing that together. So yeah, without a doubt, it's what's his name? Justin Wren, the MMA fighter. He was in Bellator and UFC. He would always say, he's like, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I always love that quote. Yeah. Like community and helping each other. It's such a important thing, and it's definitely one of those things that I think they're trying to get rid of and deconstruct. So we have to hold on to it for as much as we can, and really just remind people how important it is. So,
yeah, we're gonna, Ricky, as it turns out, we're gonna have to build back better. That's actually true, just not the way they had it in mind.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Alex, and hopefully we will. One of these days we will be able to enjoy some community together and to hang out and have a bite.
Yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be fun, Ricky. And also, same thing. If you're ever on this side of the pond, definitely reach out. And I look forward to the next, at the very least, to the next virtual talk.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. Yeah, this is it's definitely better than nothing. But thank you so much, Alex. Hey, we'll talk again. Thanks for staying up late. I'm sure it's late there. You're always a trooper with staying up and doing these shows at probably very unusual times. But thanks again. Hey, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll stay in touch, I'm sure.
Same to you and to your viewers, Ricky. Take care.
Thanks, Alex. Take care.
Okay, bye.